A woman found a magic lamp on a beach. She rubbed it, and out popped a genie. "Ask me anything, and it's yours." She thought for a moment, and she answered, "I want my husband to pay more attention to me, to protect me, to take me out frequently, to sleep close to me, and to be more caring, even if I get a tiny scratch." "No problem." Poof! And she became a smartphone. You may relate to this experience. Not that one, this one I'm about to say. I'm at the dinner table, finally coming together with the rest of my family after a long day, grateful to be together, and the small attention box in my pocket begins to vibrate. Or I'm sitting with my son, watching our evening show, and I feel that same familiar vibration. I feel the instinct to reach into my pocket and respond, even though it would pull my attention away from a moment of shared connection. In my best moments, I resist the urge with little effort. But sometimes I give in, almost unconsciously, with an unarticulated belief that whatever information my phone has for me is more important than the moment that I'm in. Much of our liturgy today on Rosh Hashanah is about crowning God as the ruler of the universe. It might be obvious to some of us that God doesn't need to be crowned, and many of us will rightfully object to this patriarchal metaphor of some idea that needs our allegiance. After all, isn't idolatry the worship of an image that we construct instead of a living reality? But somehow, our tradition is suggesting that our very life depends on our ability to crown God. While Judaism teaches that God is all-pervasive, that ein od milvado, there is nothing in reality that is not God, when we look to our experience to discover what it is that is all-pervasive, we find the experience of awareness. From the moment we came into this world, we have partaken in awareness. Even when we were sleeping, there is a part of us that is aware, that witnesses the dream or the inner life. Sometimes we remember that we were aware, and then we wake up, when we wake up, and sometimes we don't remember. But that light of awareness is always and has always been shining. That light of awareness is our attention. We might say that crowning God as the ruler of the universe means that we choose to pay attention to what is good, beautiful, and true. And yet, that choice is a difficult one to make day to day. In his book called The Siren's Call, Chris Hayes explores this phenomenon of how strategic and intentional forces outside ourselves are making it extremely difficult for us to pay attention to what is truly important to us. He uses the literal and figurative description of a siren to speak about that which forcefully compels our attention. In Homer's The Odyssey, the sirens are the compelling, beautiful voices that lead the sailors to their death. No one who hears their voices can resist their song. So the goddess Circe gives Odysseus a plan. Stuff wax in the ears of your crew so they can't hear the sirens, and have them bind you to the mast of the ship until you have sailed safely past. Odysseus follows the instruction, and when the song hits his ears, he motions to his men to loosen him so that he can follow it. But as instructed, the crew ignores him until the ship is out of earshot and he's safe. This image is one of the most potent in the Western canon. Odysseus, lashed to the mast, struggling against bonds that he himself submitted to, knowing what was in store. It has come down to us through the centuries as metaphors for many things, sin and virtue, the temptations of the flesh, and the willpower to resist them. The addict who throws his pills down the toilet in preparation for the cravings to come, and then begs for more drugs. The sirens of this story and the sirens of the urban streetscape both compel our attention against our will. And that experience, having our mind captured by that intrusive wail, is now our permanent state. We are never free from the siren's call. A literal siren like an ambulance can be a nuisance in a crowded, loud city streetscape, but it compels our attention for a societal, useful purpose. The sirens of Greek myth compel our attention to speed towards our own death. What Odysseus was doing with the wax and the mast was actively trying to manage his own attention. As dramatic as that Homeric passage is, it's also for us in the attention age almost mundane. Because to live at this moment in the world, both online and off, is to find oneself endlessly wriggling on the mast, fighting for control of our very being against the ceaseless siren calls of people and devices and corporations and malevolent actors that are trying to trap it. Some of the largest corporations in human history spend billions to find out what we crave and how much of it they can sell us. From inside our own being, attention is what constitutes our very self. But from the perspective of entities outside us, attention is like gold in a stream or oil from a rock. But unlike oil, coal, land, or capital, which exists outside of us, the chief resource of this age is embedded in our psyches. Extracting it requires cracking into our minds. There is a relationship between information and attention. Information is infinite, and attention is limited. And value derives from scarcity, which is why attention is so valuable. It's also why, in the global marketplace, information is cheap and attention is expensive. The largest corporations of our times are not dominated by information companies, but more accurately by finance and attention companies. Apple, Google, Facebook are all about converting eyeballs into cash. Amazon, world's largest online retailer, but it's more than that. Amazon is an attention and logistics company, and the product it sells are an afterthought. Ever search for a product on Amazon and find yourself confronted with dozens of nearly identical versions of similar products? These products are competing for the attentional space at the top of the search results that Amazon owns, and that's what they're paying for. What this means is that our attention has been commodified down to tiny slivers of time and sold off at auction. What does this mean for the very substance of our consciousness, the place our mind comes to rest, to be packaged and sold as if it were interchangeable with the attention of everyone else? Attention exists to solve a problem, and the problem is information. The raw quality of perceptual input that a human experiences at each moment, at any time, is overwhelming. In any moment, you could attune yourself to each leaf on the tree that you pass, the beating of your own heart, the sensation in your fingers, the sound of the breath in your nostrils. But attention allows us to screen information, grouping it into coherent, processable forms, suppressing most of it at any given moment. So to better understand how attention functions in our lives, psychologists describe a scenario that they call the cocktail party effect. But in our case, we'll call it the Shabbat Oneg effect. Imagine yourself at an Oneg with dozens of congregants, friends. You're eating a piece of herring, And you find yourself falling into conversation with a small cluster of people, some whose names you know and have seen around, and a couple who are new to you. Making small talk with acquaintances at this level of social proximity is always a bit of an effort, so you're quite focused, leaning in to shield yourself from the din that's surrounding you and making sure that you can hear clearly what those who are talking to you are saying. And in this moment, in order to pay attention, you are suppressing other information, like the group of middle schoolers who are running from one side of the room to the other. If you want, you can attend to the conversation. Psychologists call this voluntary attention, and it's what happens when you sit down to read a novel, take a test, or have a deep after-hours conversation with your partner. This form of attention works through negation as opposed to amplification. What we're actually doing in our brains is suppressing everything other than what we're focused on in order to receive the information we select. But let's say that we're in the conversation at the oneg, and all of a sudden, you hear a loud shriek at the table to the right of you. You and everyone in the room immediately whips their heads towards the noise, and you see a woman laughing hysterically. Whatever it was that she heard that was so exciting or surprising that she expressed herself without any awareness of how that expression might affect the people around her. Like the wail of a siren, this is an example of what psychologists will call involuntary attention. But there's a third kind of attention. We're back at the oneg, and you're engaging with a conversation in front of you. Your brain is theoretically suppressing an infinite amount of stimuli, and suddenly you hear, like a small firecracker, your name emerge in another conversation among a group of people on another side at the other side of the table. Your attention is jerked towards that conversation, and you catch the very end of it. Did she actually think that dress was appropriate to wear at a service? Says the woman who you think just dropped your name. Now, this phenomenon is familiar to many, and it's not just another form of involuntary attention, where something draws your attention without your intention. How did your brain know your name was being invoked if it wasn't tracking the conversation? Even as you were focusing on one conversation and tuning out all the others, some component of your brain was, like a sentry, eavesdropping on all the other conversations within earshot, transcribing and processing the words in those exchanges, on the lookout for some key words, in particular, your name. It's pretty wild. Think of the sheer processing capacity needed to pull this off. Your conscious brain is hard at work, making conversation, while in the background, your own mental oneg NSA wiretaps all the other conversations with a list of key words that will ring some kind of eternal alarm. All of this is happening in real time, in hundreds of thousands of seconds. There have been numerous experiments over the years to test which specific stimuli could break through the powerful suppression abilities of our focus. And the only stimulus that was discovered that would consistently do it was the subject's own name. And this phenomenon illustrates the third aspect of attention, called social attention. The need for social attention has at its foundation the evolutionary development that requires that we come into the world as infants, totally helpless and dependent on our mothers. Obviously, what we need to survive when we come into the world is more than mere attention. We need care. But attention is a necessary precondition for care. We are creatures whose very survival depends on attention. We perish in neglect. There is a reason why our name, and not some other keyword, wrenches our attention towards that overheard conversation. We want to know who's talking about us, who's paying attention to us. This social need will always be a primary driver of what compels our attention. And this is a key element of how social media and big corporations grab our attention online. One detail, though, that's not explained in the Odysseus story is why Circe advises Odysseus to have his crew stuff wax in his ears, but not do it himself. The whole complicated and dangerous plan to bind himself to the mast could have been avoided if he had just joined the crew in silent safety and sailed peaceably by. But Circe knew that he wanted to hear. And we all want to hear. To have our attention taken by something that promises pleasure or interest. The mental processes of attention exist to screen information because there's too much of it. But what happens when there's too little? Pascal, the math prodigy turned philosopher, sought to understand why people are tempted to undertake the hazards of war and conquest and all manner of dangerous and sinful activities rather than simply enjoy what they have. The root of it, he said, can be explained by the human condition that is the restlessness of our minds and the craving for diversion. In Buddhist teaching, this restlessness is based on the reactions of desire or aversion that characterizes our habitual responses to life. In Jewish teaching, it's the Yetzer Hara, the inclination that craves wholeness and searches for it in finite and limited wells like money and power and food and sex and shopping and on and on. When there's too much to pay attention to, we described ourselves as distracted and overwhelmed, but when there's too little, we're bored or restless. The more we amuse ourselves, the more easily we're bored, which is why addiction is our go-to analogy for our contemporary relationship to screens and phones. In the same way that an addict needs greater and greater quantities of the drug to get the same high, there seems to be a similar process with our need for things to pay attention to. I've just caught myself unconsciously taking my phone out of my pocket just to see if there's something new, a text, an email, something on the news. It's almost as if my general way of relating to the world is to be constantly searching for something to pay attention somewhere else instead of resting my attention on what is inside me and what surrounds me at any moment. Of course, our smartphones don't always have to distract us. They can also be instruments for connection. Here's an example of one middle-aged couple who finally learned how to send and receive texts on their phones. The wife, being a romantic at heart, decided one day that she'd send her husband a text while she was out of the house having coffee with a friend. She texted, "If you're sleeping, send me your dreams. If you're laughing, send me your smile. If you're eating, send me a bite. If you're drinking, send me a sip. If you're crying, send me your tears. I love you." And the husband, being a no-nonsense sort of guy, texted back, "I'm on the toilet. Please advise." The more competitive the market is for our attention, the more companies will rely on involuntary attention and use bigger and more outrageous methods to grab our attention. Attention is not a moral faculty. Without concerted effort, habit, and training, what we're drawn to focus on and what we believe to be important and worthy bear no intrinsic relationship to each other. The word that describes things that we find gripping but morally dubious is titillating. And it's this very category that occupies an enormous amount of the attention economy at any given moment. In 2024, studies estimated that around 10% of all internet traffic is pornography. This means that many billions of hours are spent by many millions of people across the globe watching things that they later feel regret or shame for having watched, only then to go back to watching it. And that's just one example. Social media algorithms, which are programmed to get our attention, are successful by providing content that makes us angry. That's how they grab our attention. Then the question is, how do they keep it? And there are many other rabbit holes that people fall into only to emerge later feeling like they just wasted hours of their lives. So how do we close the gap between what actually gets our attention and directing our attention towards what we believe is truly important? How do we truly crown God as the ruler of the universe? We can learn from how the mitzvah of Shabbat is shared with the Israelites. In Exodus, the people are told through the Ten Commandments to remember Shabbat and keep it holy. This instruction is the equivalent of engaging in activities that truly reflect our values, right? It means filling our calendar with not only Shabbat, the opportunity to be with family and Jewish community around prayers and meals and leisurely activities, but also with activities of service, helping out friends and loved ones, feeding the hungry in our community, and working to make the world a better place. It means doing whatever we can to remind ourselves of our values, of what's most important. We would also do well to cultivate a mind that is comfortable with being present with what is, with ourselves, that doesn't need endless diversions and stimulations to keep from going crazy. It's what we cultivate through meditation. But we see in the story of Exodus that remembering is not enough. After the revelation at Mount Sinai, Israel builds the golden calf, letting their old habits take over. Like the Israelites, even though we know what's most important, our habits take over and we find our attention is focused in meaningless directions. Moses realizes this. And so later in Deuteronomy, when he gives his big speech to the Israelites before they enter the land, he shares the Ten Commandments differently. He says, guard Shabbat and keep it holy. Guard instead of remember. In the case of Shabbat, the rabbis interpret this as specifically not doing work-related activities that will take us away from the Shabbat experience. Likewise, we have to take specific measures to protect our attention, or else it will get pulled where we don't intend. We need to acknowledge that there is a deeply focused and concerted effort backed by billions of dollars to grab our attention for profit motives that have nothing to do with our own well-being, and that these efforts are strategically engineered to influence the ways we interact with our screens. And since realistically, most of us will not give up our online interactions, we need to be intentional and vigilant around how and when we give our attention to our screens. Here are some ideas for how to reclaim our attention. One suggestion is to go through the notification settings on your phone and turn off all notifications except for texts from people you want to hear from at all hours through the day. This will keep your attention from constantly being pulled away from the moment with pings and vibrations that you don't need to urgently attend to. The second, put your phones away or on do not disturb in the middle of meals or social gatherings when you want to be with the people in front of you. Allow yourself the luxury of being present in real life. Set aside a period of the day where you don't look at the news. For me, I've just started to not look at the news before noon. I want my days to start with prayer and reminders of what's important to me. And once I get going, I can then absorb other information. Put away screens at least an hour before bedtime. Many sleep specialists recommend 2 to 3 hours before bedtime, but I think even the smallest buffer lets the mind relax into a calmer state. Our Jewish practice is to recite the Shema before we go to bed, and the last line of Adon Olam, Adonai li velo yirah, God is with me, I will not be afraid. So as we enter this new year together, my prayer is that each of us, in our own way, make some concrete efforts to reclaim our minds so that we can continue to live from a place of strength, purpose, and love. This is what it means to crown God as ruler of the universe. It means that our attention is on what really matters. Shana Tova.